Forced out of her own home by an abusive husband, Evelyn seemed to have lost everything. But what no one expected was that her revenge would come in a completely unexpected way. Instead of hate or violence, she chose intelligence and patience. What started as a simple fight for her freedom soon turned into a battle against dark secrets, revealing a criminal network far bigger than she had ever imagined. Will Evelyn escape the shadows of her past, or will the forces trying to destroy her catch up before she can truly win? Discover this gripping tale of survival and courage, where true power lies not in revenge, but in the ability to rebuild yourself. The park was nearly deserted that night. The streetlights flickered in the distance, as if they were silent witnesses to the quiet drama unfolding on one of its benches. Evelyn sat there motionless, with a small suitcase by her side. Her dark hair hung messily over her face, tousled by the cold wind, but she didn't feel it. She felt nothing. The emptiness in her chest was too vast, too deep for the cold or anything else to fill it. She had been thrown out of her home, the home where she had built her life, the home where she believed she would be happy forever. Now, it belonged to him, to Caleb, the man who had sworn to love and protect her, her husband, her tormentor. She could still hear his words, the ones that had shattered her into 1,000 pieces. "You're useless. Get out of here. I don't want to see you anymore." Those words had been the final blow, the one that had pushed her out of the door of her own house. Evelyn had stood frozen, unable to fully process what was happening as he threw her clothes onto the ground, one item after another, as if they were nothing more than trash. His eyes, which had once been warm and filled with promises, were now cold and filled with disdain. And she, like an automaton, had left, walking aimlessly under a gray sky, unable to feel or think. She just walked. But tonight was different. Something inside her was beginning to change. She had spent years under Caleb's control, enduring insults, scorn, and in the past few months, pushes and threats. At first, she had believed it was her fault. She thought that if she were more accommodating, if she understood him better, things would improve. But no, nothing had changed, except that she was worn down, becoming a shadow of the woman she once was. And yet here she was, in a park, alone, without a home and without direction. But something inside her refused to give up. A spark, small and faint, but strong enough to make her realize one simple, powerful truth. "You haven't beaten me," she whispered to herself, almost without believing it. But the phrase stuck in her mind, resonating. Caleb hadn't completely beaten her, at least not yet. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, allowing memories to flood her mind. She remembered how it all started. Caleb had been charming at first, attentive, affectionate. He was the man she had always dreamed of. Her friends envied her, and her family told her she had found the perfect husband. She had believed it too. She felt lucky to have met him, and little by little she gave him all her trust. But like a snake hidden in the grass, Caleb had started showing his true nature after they got married. The veiled criticisms, the small comments that made her feel inferior, all under the guise of concern or love. And she, blinded by the desire to make things work, accepted it. Until the criticisms turned into orders, the sweet words into veiled threats. Then came the control. Caleb wanted to know her every move, every phone call she made. If she took longer than expected to return home, he accused her of being with another man. His irrational jealousy was the beginning of his domination. And slowly, the love she once felt eroded until there was nothing left. Just fear. But now, sitting on that park bench, Evelyn took a deep breath. She could feel something new, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Not a destructive anger, but one that burned slowly, fueled by injustice, by the pain she had endured in silence. That anger kept her standing, kept her alive. "You haven't beaten me," she repeated, this time louder. With that thought in mind, Evelyn stood up. She didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew she wasn't going to let Caleb get away with it. Not after everything he had done to her. She walked toward Layla's house, her childhood friend, the only person she felt she could turn to at that moment. They hadn't spoken much in recent years. Caleb didn't like her having friends, but she knew Layla would welcome her. When she arrived, the door opened quickly. Layla was there, frowning, her eyes full of concern. "What happened?" she asked as she ushered Evelyn inside. "Caleb kicked me out," Evelyn said, her voice breaking, unable to say more. Layla didn't need explanations. She knew, deep down, what Evelyn had been enduring. Although she had never wanted to talk about it, Layla had seen the signs, the changes in her friend, and had suspected it all this time. She hugged her tightly, asking no questions, giving her the space she needed. "You can stay here as long as you need," Layla said as she guided her toward the small guest room. Evelyn, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened, collapsed onto the bed. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She didn't want to. She was tired of crying. And for the first time in a long time, she began to think about how to take control of her life. The next few days were hard. Evelyn woke up each morning with a knot in her stomach. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had lost, the house that was now Caleb's, the years she had dedicated to the man who had destroyed her from within. But something in her was changing. Every morning, after having a quiet coffee with Layla, she would go for a walk in the park. The fresh air, the trees, and the movement of people helped clear her mind. And little by little, the fog in her head started to lift. She began to see things more clearly. Caleb had abused her for years. He had controlled every aspect of her life, destroyed her self-esteem, made her feel insignificant. But now, away from him, Evelyn was starting to recover pieces of herself she thought had been lost forever. During those walks, something clicked in her mind. She wasn't going to let Caleb get away with this. Not in the way he expected, not with violence or hatred. She was going to be smarter than him. After all, there was something Caleb had arrogantly overlooked: the law. Evelyn didn't know much about legal rights, but she knew she had some. They were still married. They still shared assets. And while Caleb had kicked her out of the house, she had rights to that property, to everything they had built together. He couldn't just dispose of her like a discarded object. One day, as she was walking through the park, Evelyn decided it was time to take action. With the little money she had saved, she contacted a lawyer, Samantha, a friend of Layla's who specialized in women's rights. Samantha had a reputation for being relentless in defending her clients. When Evelyn told her story, from the abuse to the expulsion, Samantha listened carefully, and when Evelyn finished, the lawyer smiled calmly. "Evelyn, what he's done is illegal," Samantha said firmly, "and I have good news for you." Those words ignited something inside Evelyn. For the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a way out, that she wasn't alone, and that she could win. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn and Samantha worked quietly, preparing the case. Samantha was meticulous, going through every document, every detail of Caleb's life, looking for any loose ends she could use to Evelyn's advantage. Meanwhile, Caleb continued with his life, confident that everything was under control. He had thrown Evelyn out, and to him, that was enough. He didn't worry when he started receiving legal notices. He didn't take them seriously. After all, what could Evelyn do to him? To Caleb, she had always been the weak woman who never stood up for herself, who always came back. What Caleb didn't know was that Evelyn was no longer that woman. With each passing day, she grew stronger. She found a job at a small flower shop, a simple job that gave her a sense of independence she hadn't felt in years. Every time she placed a bouquet in its place or attended to a customer, she felt herself reclaiming a little more of who she once was. And every night when she returned to Layla's house, she would sit down with Samantha to go over the progress of the case. There was a lot to do, but little by little, they were building a solid case. The law was on her side, and in his arrogance, Caleb hadn't realized he was walking straight into his own downfall. Evelyn had something Caleb hadn't anticipated: patience. She knew he underestimated her ability to defend herself, that he didn't believe she could stand up to him. But that only played in her favor. The more confident he was, the more vulnerable he would be when everything came crashing down. Then one day, Samantha called with the best news yet. "Evelyn, we're ready to proceed with the case," the lawyer said with a smile of satisfaction. It was the beginning of the end for Caleb. When Evelyn received the call from Samantha confirming that the case was ready to move forward, she felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew the moment had come to act, but uncertainty gnawed at her. Would everything they had gathered be enough? How would Caleb react when he realized he was losing control? The next few weeks were a quiet storm. Evelyn continued working at the flower shop, But every day she felt the tension building in her chest. Every time she handed over a bouquet, every time she arranged the flowers in the shop, she thought about the inevitable confrontation that was coming. The legal notices Samantha had sent were starting to take effect. They knew Caleb wouldn't be able to ignore them forever. He would try to resist, maybe even fight back, but Evelyn was prepared, or at least she wanted to believe she was. "Are you sure about this?" Layla asked one night as they sat in her small kitchen having dinner. Layla had supported her unconditionally from the beginning, but now that everything was moving forward, her concern was clear. "Caleb is unpredictable. I don't know how he'll react when he realizes he's losing." Evelyn looked at her friend, trying to seem more confident than she felt. "It's what I have to do, Layla. I can't keep running from him," she replied with a firm tone, though the fear still lingered inside her. Layla nodded silently, respecting her friend's decision, but couldn't help feeling a chill. She knew things could turn dangerous. Evelyn wasn't just fighting for her rights. She was fighting to reclaim her life, and Caleb wasn't the type of man who accepted defeat easily. The first blow came one cold morning, while Evelyn was arranging flowers in the shop. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, and when she looked at the screen, she saw Caleb's name flashing. Her heart skipped a beat. Since she had left the house, he hadn't called her once, and now, seeing his name, a chill ran down her spine. She took a deep breath before answering, mentally preparing herself for what was coming. "What is all this, Evelyn?" Caleb's voice, icy and full of contempt, echoed in her ears. "What do you think you're doing? Do you really think you can take what's mine?" Evelyn gripped the phone tightly, her hands trembling slightly. But this time, she wasn't the scared woman she used to be. "I'm only asking for what's fair, Caleb," she responded calmly, though inside she could feel the storm approaching. "I've endured too much, and I'm not going to let you control me anymore." "Control you?" Caleb let out a bitter laugh. "You've always been useless. Everything you have, everything you ever had, was because of me. Do you really think you can make it without me?" His words hit Evelyn like daggers, but they didn't break her. She had heard them so many times before, and this time she wasn't going to let them seep into her soul. "That's for the judge to decide," she replied before hanging up, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. But the phone rang again almost immediately. This time she didn't answer. She knew Caleb wouldn't stop there, that he would do everything in his power to make her feel small, to destroy any spark of hope she might have. For years, that had been his way of controlling her, manipulating her emotionally until there was nothing left of the woman she had once been. But those days were over. Layla found Evelyn minutes later sitting in a corner of the shop, her hands trembling. "He called, didn't he?" Layla asked, already knowing the answer. Evelyn nodded, unable to hold back her tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of frustration. She knew the path to freedom wouldn't be easy, but the weight of facing Caleb, of challenging everything he had meant to her for so long, was overwhelming. "He can't hurt you anymore," Layla said, kneeling in front of her. "He can't touch you, not anymore." Evelyn took a deep breath, wiping her tears and nodding. She knew Layla was right, but she also knew the real battle had yet to come. The day of the hearing arrived like a silent storm. Evelyn had spent the night awake, her thoughts swirling around what would happen the next day. Samantha had assured her they had a solid case, that there was enough evidence to not only claim the house, but also other assets Caleb had hidden in his own name, believing she would never dare fight back. Evelyn felt nervous, but also ready. She wasn't seeking revenge in the traditional sense. She didn't want to destroy Caleb, but simply to reclaim what was hers, her dignity, her life. However, she knew Caleb wouldn't see it that way. The courtroom was cold, and the echo of footsteps bounced off the high walls. Evelyn entered with Samantha by her side, while Caleb was already seated on the other side of the room, his lawyer next to him. When he saw her, he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile of contempt, of superiority. To him, this hearing was just a formality, something that would end quickly in his favor. He was convinced that Evelyn didn't have the strength to follow through, that she would crumble under the pressure. But Evelyn didn't look away. She kept her eyes fixed on him with a calmness she hadn't known she possessed. She sat down next to Samantha, who gave her a slight squeeze on the arm, a silent assurance that everything was under control. The judge entered and the proceedings began. The first few hours were tense but predictable. Caleb's lawyer tried to paint Evelyn as a wife who hadn't contributed enough to the marriage, someone who had taken advantage of Caleb and wasn't entitled to anything. Evelyn's stomach churned as she listened to those words, but she remained silent. She knew that this was Caleb's lawyer's moment, and soon it would be hers. And then, when the judge gave Samantha the floor, everything changed. Your Honor, I would like to present a series of documents that show Mr. Caleb's financial transactions over the past few years, Samantha announced, standing with a stack of folders in hand. Here, we have evidence of hidden bank accounts, tax evasion, and other undeclared assets that Mr. Caleb has been moving without my client's knowledge. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Caleb, who had been relaxed in his chair until that moment, visibly tensed. His eyes widened as he saw the documents Samantha had handed over to the judge. This is a misunderstanding, Caleb stammered, casting a quick glance at his lawyer, who also seemed taken aback. But there was no misunderstanding. Samantha had done her job impeccably, investigating every transaction, every move Caleb had made in the past few years. She had found evidence of minor fraud, money diversions, and assets he had hidden to avoid sharing with Evelyn. Everything was there, detailed in black and white. My client is not only claiming her rightful share of the assets acquired during the marriage, Samantha continued firmly, but is also denouncing Mr. Caleb's illegal activities. These documents show that Mr. Caleb has been committing financial fraud for years, hiding assets and evading taxes, which not only affects my client, but also the financial system. Evelyn watched Caleb's face as his arrogance slowly crumbled. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time since this had all started, he seemed genuinely afraid. The courtroom remained silent, broken only by the murmuring of the judge as he reviewed the documents. Evelyn could feel the weight of the moment on her shoulders. Caleb, who had always been so sure of his power, so convinced of his control over her, was now in a position he had never anticipated. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" the judge asked, his gaze fixed on Caleb. The man who had once controlled every aspect of Evelyn's life now looked bewildered, like a trapped animal. His lawyer tried to intercede, but the evidence was irrefutable. Caleb had committed fraud, and now he was about to face not only the loss of the house and assets he had so carefully protected, but also the possibility of a criminal investigation. Evelyn remained silent, watching as his world unraveled brick by brick. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered his verdict. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Evelyn Harper. The house and disputed assets will be transferred to her name. Additionally, an investigation into Mr. Caleb's financial activities, including his bank accounts and undeclared transactions, will be initiated. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over her. She had won. But more than a victory over Caleb, she had won her freedom. As she left the courthouse, Caleb caught up with her on the steps. His face was twisted, full of barely contained fury. "This isn't over," he hissed, venom in his voice. Evelyn looked at him with a calmness that unsettled him. "Oh, it's over, Caleb," she replied softly. "For you, it's already over." And without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Caleb alone, trapped in the ruins of his own arrogance. With Caleb's defeat behind her, Evelyn's life began to change rapidly. She had regained the house, but more importantly, she had regained her power, her dignity, and her freedom. She knew she didn't want to simply return to the life she had before. She wanted something more. With the settlement from the assets and the house in her name, Evelyn opened her own business, a consulting firm designed to help women in situations similar to what she had lived through. Her goal was to use her experience to defend those who had been victims of abuse, helping them find justice and regain control over their lives. Meanwhile, Caleb faced the consequences of his actions. His friends abandoned him, his businesses started to crumble, and the criminal investigation that Samantha had initiated moved forward quickly. The man who had once had everything now found himself with nothing. But what hurt him the most wasn't the loss of his wealth. It was the fact that Evelyn had won. The woman he had always underestimated had proven to be stronger and smarter than he could have ever imagined. Evelyn lived in peace. She knew the journey hadn't been easy, but she had learned that true vengeance wasn't about destroying Caleb. It was about rebuilding herself. And for her, that was far more valuable. In the end, she had been underestimated, but never again. In the months that followed, Evelyn's life slowly took on a new rhythm. The flower shop became a haven for her, a place where she could quietly rebuild herself piece by piece. She had found comfort in her routine, a certain peace in the simplicity of arranging flowers, helping customers, and watching as life moved forward without Caleb in it. The consulting firm she had founded was gaining momentum too, as more and more women reached out, seeking advice, strength, and guidance to leave situations like hers behind. But despite the calm she had found, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was still looming. Caleb's words echoed in her mind, his final threat as she left the courthouse that day. This isn't over. She knew the man he was. She knew he wouldn't accept defeat so easily. And as the weeks turned into months, Evelyn waited, constantly on edge, for the other shoe to drop. Then, one afternoon as she was closing the flower shop, her phone rang. It was Samantha. "Evelyn, I have news," Samantha said, her voice calm but firm. "You should sit down." Evelyn's heart raced. She hadn't heard from Samantha in a few weeks, and every time the lawyer called, it usually meant something significant was happening. "What's going on?" Evelyn asked, gripping the counter, bracing herself for whatever was coming next. "There's been a new development with Caleb's case," Samantha continued. "The investigation into his finances uncovered more than we expected, a lot more." Evelyn's breath hitched. More? She thought they had found everything. Enough to bring him down. Enough to finally close that chapter of her life. What could they have missed? "Apparently Caleb was involved in something far more serious than we initially believed," Samantha explained. "There's evidence of offshore accounts, illegal business dealings, and connections with some very dangerous people. The authorities are preparing to launch a full criminal investigation. And Evelyn, they're considering him a flight risk." A cold chill ran down Evelyn's spine. "A flight risk? You mean he might run?" Samantha hesitated. "It's possible. There's a lot of money at stake, and if the authorities close in on him too quickly, he might try to disappear. We need to be prepared for anything." Evelyn's mind spun. She had thought the worst was behind her, but now it seemed that Caleb's fall from grace was just beginning. And this time it wasn't just about property or a failed marriage. It was about his survival, his desperation, and what he might be willing to do to protect himself. In the days that followed, Evelyn couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. She began to watch her surroundings more carefully. She avoided walking home alone at night. Layla, ever the supportive friend, insisted on staying over at Evelyn's house whenever possible, fearing that Caleb might make good on his threats if he felt truly cornered. But Caleb's presence remained hauntingly absent. The man who had once ruled her life, whose words had cut her deeper than any knife, was now nothing more than a shadow, lurking in the background of her thoughts. Still, Evelyn knew better than to underestimate him. One evening, after a particularly long day at the flower shop, Evelyn returned home to find something chilling. Sitting on her doorstep was a single envelope, unmarked and plain. Her heart pounded in her chest as she bent down to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside was a note written in Caleb's unmistakable handwriting. "You've won this round, Evelyn. But don't think for a second that it's over. I'll be back, and when I return, you won't see me coming." Evelyn dropped the note as if it had burned her fingers. Fear surged through her, but it was quickly replaced by something else: anger. She was done being afraid of Caleb. He had taken enough of her life. She wasn't going to let him take any more. Without wasting a moment, she called Samantha, informing her of the threat. "We need to take this to the authorities," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "He's not going to stop." Samantha agreed and acted swiftly, ensuring that the note was handed over to the police. They advised Evelyn to be cautious but reassured her that Caleb was under heavy surveillance due to the ongoing investigation. Still, the threat hung over her like a dark cloud. For weeks, Evelyn carried on, trying to live her life, but the tension gnawed at her. She found herself looking over her shoulder constantly, jumping at small noises, her mind always on high alert. Caleb's silence was terrifying. If he had made good on his word, if he truly planned to strike when she least expected it, she had no idea what form his retaliation would take. Then one day, the news finally broke. Evelyn was at the flower shop when Layla rushed in, breathless, her phone in hand. "Evelyn, turn on the news, now." With trembling hands, Evelyn pulled out her phone and quickly found the live stream Layla was talking about. The headline scrolling across the screen made her blood run cold. Businessman Caleb Morrison arrested, attempting to flee country. Authorities uncover major financial fraud network. The image of Caleb, disheveled and handcuffed, being led into a police car flashed on the screen. His face was twisted in a mix of fury and fear, a far cry from the confident, controlling man she had once known. The reporter's voice provided more details. Caleb had been caught attempting to board a private jet, with forged documents and access to millions of dollars hidden in offshore accounts. Evelyn's legs felt weak, and she collapsed into the nearest chair, her phone slipping from her hands. She had known it might come to this, but seeing it unfold, seeing the man who had once held her life in his hands finally brought down, was overwhelming. "Evelyn," Layla whispered, her hand on Evelyn's shoulder, "it's over." For the first time in months, Evelyn allowed herself to believe it. But as the shock of Caleb's arrest settled in, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. Sure, he had been caught, and his crimes were out in the open, but deep down, she knew Caleb. He was the type of man who always had a plan, always had a backup, and she doubted this time would be any different. And she was right. 3 days later, Evelyn received a visit from the police. It was late in the evening, and she had just closed the flower shop when they knocked on her door. The officer, a tall, stern-looking man, introduced himself and quickly got to the point. "We found something during the investigation into Caleb's finances," he said, his tone serious. "It appears that he wasn't just planning to flee the country. He was planning something much worse." Evelyn's stomach turned. "What do you mean?" The officer hesitated for a moment before continuing. "We believe Caleb had hired someone to deal with you, a hitman. But we've intercepted the communication just in time. You're safe now, but we wanted to inform you of the danger you were in." Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. A hitman? Caleb had gone that far? Even from behind bars, he had tried to ensure that she wouldn't survive this battle. Evelyn stood frozen in her doorway, her breath shallow as she processed the officer's words. Caleb had hired someone to kill her. Even after everything, after he had lost everything, he hadn't let go of his need for control, his desire to destroy her life. He had escalated from emotional manipulation to financial fraud, and now to murder. The realization left her shaken to her core. "We've taken the necessary precautions," the officer continued. "The man Caleb hired has been apprehended, and we have enough evidence to add new charges to Caleb's case. But I want you to know that we're here for your safety. You're protected now." "Protected," Evelyn repeated softly, the word feeling foreign on her lips. For so long she had lived in fear, fear of Caleb's wrath, fear of losing everything, fear of the unknown. And now, even as his empire crumbled, he had tried one last time to claim her life. But she had survived. She was still standing. The officer's reassurances and advice on precautionary measures faded into the background as Evelyn's mind raced. She thought back to every moment Caleb had tried to break her. The insults, the isolation, the threats, it had all led to this. But she hadn't let him win. She was stronger than him, and she was still here, still breathing. When the officer finally left, Evelyn sat in silence for a long time. Layla was by her side, quiet but ever present, her hand resting on Evelyn's shoulder in silent solidarity. The weight of the last few days, the last few months, hung heavy in the air. "They caught him," Layla said after a long pause, trying to offer comfort. "You're safe now." But Evelyn's mind was elsewhere, her thoughts tangled in the complexity of everything that had unfolded. She had spent so much time fighting, running, and surviving. Now, for the first time, she wasn't sure what to do next. "I know," Evelyn finally whispered, her voice steady but distant. "But this doesn't feel like the end." Layla furrowed her brow, confused. "What do you mean? Caleb is going to jail for a long time. You've won." Evelyn shook her head, her instincts telling her something still lingered. "It's not about winning or losing. It's about what comes next." Over the next few weeks, Evelyn tried to return to some sense of normalcy, but it was difficult. Even with Caleb behind bars, even knowing that his plans to hurt her had been stopped, there was a constant undercurrent of unease. Every time she walked through the flower shop or locked her front door at night, she felt as if something was just out of sight, waiting. One evening, while Evelyn was closing the shop, she received a call from Samantha. It was late, and she wasn't expecting to hear from her lawyer. especially not after everything had seemingly been resolved. She answered, her voice wary. "Evelyn," Samantha began, her tone tense. "There's something you need to know." Evelyn's heart sank. "What is it?" "There's been a development in Caleb's case. It turns out, while they were investigating his offshore accounts, they discovered something different. It's not just about the money laundering or the fraud. Caleb was part of something much larger, something we didn't see before." Evelyn gripped the counter, bracing herself for what was coming. "He was involved in an international criminal network, Evelyn. It's not just about finances. There's more at stake than we thought, and it could be dangerous." The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. Just when she thought she had reached the end of this nightmare, another layer had revealed itself, one that was far darker than she had ever imagined. "What does this mean for me?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means that there may still be people out there tied to Caleb who haven't been caught yet. People who know about you, and who might see you as a threat," Samantha explained, her tone serious. "The authorities are doing everything they can to protect you, but I wanted to make sure you knew what was happening. You need to stay vigilant." Evelyn's blood ran cold. The thought of being a target, not just for Caleb but for people she didn't even know, left her reeling. Her fight with Caleb had always been personal, but this was something else entirely. In the days that followed, Evelyn's life became a tightrope walk between fear and resilience. Every noise, every unfamiliar face, every unexpected knock at the door set her on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still out there, watching, waiting. But as the days turned into weeks, and then months, the threat began to feel more distant, more like a lingering shadow than an imminent danger. Evelyn refused to let herself be consumed by fear. She had come too far, survived too much, to let Caleb or anyone else destroy the life she had worked so hard to rebuild. One evening, as she sat in her living room, sipping tea and watching the sunset, Evelyn allowed herself to finally relax. She had done everything she could. She had fought for justice, reclaimed her life, and exposed Caleb's crimes. The authorities had assured her that she was safe now, that the network Caleb had been a part of had been dismantled. Slowly, she was beginning to believe them. But then, just as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, there was a knock at the door. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her mind raced, remembering all the precautions she had taken, the police patrols that had been assigned to her street. Slowly, she stood and made her way to the door, her hands trembling as she reached for the handle. When she opened it, she was met with the last face she ever expected to see. It wasn't Caleb. It wasn't anyone from his past life or the criminal network that had haunted her nightmares. It was a woman. She stood there tall and composed, her features sharp and unreadable. There was something both familiar and unfamiliar about her, a presence that immediately put Evelyn on edge. "Evelyn Harper?" the woman asked, her voice calm and controlled. Evelyn nodded, unsure of what to say. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm here on behalf of someone you know very well. I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The calm she had fought so hard to regain shattered in an instant. This wasn't over. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she faced the mysterious woman standing at her door. There was a calm menace in the woman's eyes, and despite her outward composure, Evelyn sensed danger lurking beneath the surface. "Who sent you?" Evelyn demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands trembled behind the door. The woman smiled again, but it was the kind of smile that chilled Evelyn to the bone. "Let's just say I'm here on behalf of people who were disappointed with how things ended with Caleb. They have unfinished business, and I'm afraid you're part of it." Evelyn's mind raced. Who was this woman? What network was she talking about? Caleb had been arrested. The authorities had promised her safety, but now it seemed the nightmare wasn't over. "I don't know what you think you'll accomplish," Evelyn said, mustering her courage. "Caleb is in jail. His empire has fallen. There's nothing left for you here." The woman's expression remained unchanged, as if Evelyn's words had no effect. "You'd be surprised what people like Caleb leave behind. Secrets, connections, people willing to finish what he started." Panic surged through Evelyn, but she forced herself to stay calm. This woman, whoever she was, thrived on fear. Evelyn wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. "What do you want from me?" Evelyn asked, her voice steadier now, determined to get answers. "I'm here to offer you a choice," the woman replied, leaning in slightly. You can either disappear quietly, leave everything behind, and never be heard from again, or we can make sure your story ends like Caleb wanted it to. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. The threat was clear, and for a moment, fear washed over her. But as quickly as it came, that fear was replaced by something stronger: resolve. Evelyn had spent years running, hiding, and letting Caleb control her. She had fought for her freedom, fought to reclaim her life, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her again. She stood up straighter, her eyes locking with the woman's. No. The woman's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. No? You don't get to control my life, Evelyn said, her voice firm. Not anymore. Caleb tried, and look where it got him. I won't let you or anyone else scare me into hiding. For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed the woman's face. She hadn't expected Evelyn to stand up to her, hadn't anticipated the strength that had been forged in the fire of Caleb's abuse. But Evelyn wasn't the woman she used to be. You're making a mistake, the woman warned, her voice icy. No, Evelyn replied, her voice unyielding. The mistake was thinking I would ever let fear rule my life again. Without waiting for a response, Evelyn stepped back and slammed the door in the woman's face. Her hands shook as she locked it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she had done it. She had faced the fear, and she had refused to back down. The next few hours were a blur. Evelyn immediately called Samantha and the authorities, reporting the incident. The police arrived quickly, taking her statement and setting up additional surveillance around her home. It was clear that whoever had sent the woman wasn't just a fleeting threat, but Evelyn wasn't alone anymore. She had the law on her side, and most importantly, she had her own strength. In the weeks that followed, the authorities tracked down the remnants of Caleb's network, dismantling the criminal organization piece by piece. The woman who had come to Evelyn's door was caught, and it was revealed that she had been one of Caleb's closest associates, someone who had been involved in his dealings from the very beginning. With her arrest, the final chapter of Caleb's dark legacy was closed. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a sense of true peace. Caleb was gone, his empire destroyed, and the people who had tried to continue his reign of terror were behind bars. More than that, Evelyn had reclaimed not just her life, but her sense of self. She was no longer the woman who had once been broken and afraid. She was strong, resilient, and in control of her own destiny. Evelyn's journey is one of resilience and transformation. She faced immense pain, abuse, and betrayal at the hands of the person she once loved and trusted. Caleb had tried to break her spirit, strip her of her identity, and ultimately take her life. But Evelyn refused to be a victim. She fought back, not with violence or hatred, but with determination and intelligence. In the end, Evelyn's greatest victory wasn't just over Caleb. It was over her own fear. She learned that true strength comes from within, from the courage to stand up for oneself, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Her story is a reminder that no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always a way forward, always a chance to rebuild, to reclaim what is rightfully yours. And that is the real lesson. It's not about revenge or destruction. It's about rising above, reclaiming your life, and choosing to live on your own terms. If Evelyn's story moved you, we want to hear your thoughts. How would you have faced such difficult choices? Would you have fought for justice like Evelyn, or taken a different path? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit the like button if you found this story powerful and inspiring. Share it with your friends to spread this message of strength and resilience. Also, we'd love to hear your suggestions for future stories. What kind of tales of triumph or struggle would you like to see next? Make sure to subscribe to our channel, Driven by Stories, for more gripping, emotionally impactful stories of survival, redemption, and empowerment. You won't want to miss what's coming next.